welcome. I am Marc Gruzenski, Managing Director at the McLean Group, and today I'll be moderating a panel discussion entitled Evolution of Critical Event Management. We'll be talking about where we've been, where we are now, and where we need to go. This panel is part of a summer speaker series at McLean Group, where every other Thursday we cover topics spanning our core focus areas in defense, government, intelligence, critical infrastructure, and security, mergers and acquisitions. And you can find our past schedule and past recordings on our website. Today, I'm delighted to have four distinguished guests to join me on the virtual stage. Bruce McIndoe is founder of iJET World Aware, currently president of McIndoe Risk Advisory. Ty Richmond, who's president at Allied Universal, oversees several risk areas, risk advisory and consulting services, executive protection and intelligence, event services, compliance and investigations, retail, shopping center, and mall vertical. So he's not busy at all. Dave Hammel is CEO and founder of Balcony.io, geo collaboration platform that helps orchestrate operations, most notably emergency event management operations. And Admiral Michael LeFever, who is CEO of Concentric. It's a physical and cyber risk consultancy. So gentlemen, I appreciate you joining the stage. We've got a great spread of people with diverse backgrounds here, currently working on different aspects of the project. Let's start off with a brief introduction to who you are and where critical event management has been. When we say critical event management, naturally we mean thinking about a major event that's disruptive, poses serious risk or threat to assets and people, managing those disruptive incidents. Or I feel like as this year is spanning, it's just an average Thursday morning before breakfast. But let's talk about where we've been, cast ourselves back a good 20 years or so. I'm sure each of you have had, a momentous turning point or an observation or an experience that happened back in the day that really set the stage for how you, as leaders and luminaries today, help to manage critical events. So I'd kind of like to start, cast ourselves 20-ish years ago, pick, an event, a time frame, and let us get to know your own unique perspective on the matter before we kind of jump into what you're doing today, and how the industry is managing critical events. Bruce, no better place to start than you. I know we were both.
Does that make me the oldest, right?
No, that's not it at all. But you effectively had an observation while you were in supporting the Intel community that set the stage for the founding of iJET, and frankly, how a lot of the travel risk management, security companies, intelligence companies today are approaching critical events. So cast us back to your days in the Intel community and how you effectively founded iJET.
Yeah, I mean, this was back in the 80s, but I would say more specifically going into the mid to late 90s. I think the government's answer to open source was FIBIS, the Foreign Information Broadcast Service, and they would capture newspapers and things around the world and translate them and shoot them in for consumption by the government and Intel community. But what came on the heels of that eventually was a project called Intelling. And that was to try to bring open source to the analysts, right? And so that was how I got involved when I was working with NSA, detailed around that. And we were also doing some work in private sector. And it was really, that was my aha moment. This was under Ken Minahan, was there at the end of the 90s. But I had the opportunity to go to Bear Stearns, that doesn't exist anymore, Goldman Sachs, and some of the other financial institutions, and kind of looked at what they were doing around quote unquote intelligence. And it was really sad. And for a young guy, talking to the seniors and saying, we really need to help these companies because basically they have, providers that at that time, kind of Kroll and Pinkerton and Control Risks were the big providers of Intel, were day shops. They were Monday through Friday, and they were doing basically news summarization. The most timely product they had was a daily, a daily intelligence brief. And it was like, we really need to do better. We need to, provide, better intel, especially for multinationals. And, the general consensus was they're not going to fight that battle. This was 1998, 99. And anyway, so, and I looked at this and said, we can build this, we can create an INW indication and warning program and do better than what's out there. And that was essentially the nugget of the kernel that started iJET. And interestingly enough, in the summer of 2002, we acquired Kroll Information Services, and then January 2003 acquired Pinkerton's Global Information Service. And so kind of just rolled that up and really became kind of the #1 provider for more operational intelligence, and more importantly, dissemination, getting it in the hands of the actual people that could use it. I think was the other big success that we had, versus just throwing out email newsletters and hoping people read it. So that's broadly where I came from in October of '99.
Yeah, and naturally, don't have to go back too far in history, world events, just the lesson learned that spins out, whether it's Pearl Harbor, 9/11. It's always consistent information overload, not getting the right intel in the right hands for the right decision making. So and that model's been replicated. Your model's been replicated by many times over. So great story there. Ty, let's go to you, if you don't mind. Let's cast back. I know you were chief security officer at the Fortune 50 company, CEO, or in the C-suite of large global multinational protective services companies. What was critical event management like 20-ish years ago when you were CSO at a multinational, and how has it evolved in the roles that you've had since?
Well, I loved Bruce's comments, because I was an end user when all of those services were in place, and it did bring back a quick memory or two of what it was like to have kind of temporary intermittent services relative to intelligence and critical event processing. And I've, as you mentioned, I've had the benefit and have been blessed in that I've been able to be on both sides of that equation, if you will, both the end user as well as the service provider. And in the mid-90s, I went to work for Hewlett Packard, which was the first global corporation that I really worked for. And global meaning that they had operations distributed really and truly on a global level. And that was probably my awakening to what it really meant to have resiliency and business continuity planning and the integration of those with the business. It was clunky. There were still a lot of silos back then. And I think all you have to do today is look at a 10K, and you can see how important risk mitigation and enterprise risk management, how big those issues are at a board level, which has changed dramatically, I think, over the years. At Hewlett Packard had a spinoff called Agilent Technology, and I actually went and lived overseas and lived in Singapore and ran an infrastructure business service across Asia for Agilent Technologies. And that's really when I started understanding more about the business dynamic and the really critical importance of having the functions integrated into the business process, and having the, what I would call, continuous event management versus just critical event management. And that has really evolved, and I think become even more mature today. And I would imagine my colleagues would say the same thing, that we've seen the maturity of this process. Even though there are still challenges, it's definitely dramatically changed. The silos are no longer as evident as they are. The CSOs and the senior executive leaders of these functions have a seat at the table. The 10Ks represent the report card and the scorecard, if you will, of how corporations are managing risk and mitigating it accordingly. So to me, that's been the biggest change, is just the maturity of the discipline itself, and then the more broader integration capabilities of businesses to have functions, leaders in the business, whether it's domestic, overseas, all facets of the business, I think, are much more intertwined now than they have been historically.
Yeah, that definitely resonates. Thanks for that. Admiral Mike LeFever, sir, you had a long distinguished career in the Navy, commanded several units that were responsible for, over that time of the career, for disaster recovery twice in Pakistan. Love to hear context around how that has shaped your approach through military career on managing critical events.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yeah, it was an interesting, here I was a strike group commander with 5,500 Marines in the Gulf when the horrific earthquake hit Pakistan in 2005 and 6. And General Abizaid at the time and Admiral Nichols sent me in. So here I was, an admiral 700 miles from saltwater, operating in the Hindu Kush and the Himalayas. As John Allen would say, do we need a good admiral in the Himalayas? But what that was is, it was a horrific 100 by 200 kilometer area, 78,000 killed, 177,000 injured, with 3.5 million people homeless, with winter rapidly approaching up in the Himalayas. And then no kind deed goes unpunished. After that one, I had been there back as a senior mil rep in 8 through 11 through the Bin Laden raid. And then during that time, they had the horrific floods from the Indus River. That was like a slow moving tsunamis that if you superimpose the map on the United States, it would stretch from Maine to Florida, with about 16 million people displaced during those floods. So those events, kind of what came to me was that there's actually an anatomy to these critical events, or a crisis, so to speak. I characterize it as seeing a replication. That those first responses, it's kind of like phase one, a 911 moment. It is just triage. It's trying to figure out how to save lives, how to get people out of harm's way to be able to do it. And there was a phase that I call kind of the second and third order effects, that if you didn't have the right separation of the displacement camps for sanitation or clean water, then you would end up with dysentery or even a more significant event afterwards. And it was all geared to get to phase three, which I would call trying to get back to normalcy. You try to move the situation. We built temporary schools. We built infrastructure to be able to allow transportation to flow. We were providing, relief from our helicopters and our strategic airlift and sea lift that the United States has to be able to stabilize it, but try to get it back to normalcy as much. And then it became an issue where you had to really focus on the rebuild reconstruction and what that meant to get to that recovery, probably that new normal, because it wasn't going to go back to normal after a devastation, either the earthquake or the flood. So that anatomy of a crisis led us to believe that, one of the things that was really a prescient moment when General Abizaid in the first couple of weeks came ashore and looked at me and says, "Hey, Mike, this is great." I gave him assessment. We were flown in MASH hospitals and another Navy Marine Corps hospitals, 30 helicopters. But he says, "What's your exit strategy?" And I looked at him, I went, "Hey, boss, I'm just getting here. What is it?" But it was pressing in that, what was the end game? He said, "I needed to, provide humanitarian relief and to improve U.S.-Pakistan relations." And so that enabled that end game first. In fact, Roderick and I are actually writing a book on it, how to lead through crisis, was really a set for us that in the end, as we got to phase 2 and 3 and 4, all those decisions and how you prepared was with that in mind. How did you want to leave this crisis? What shape you wanted to be in as a company, or, in this particular case, in our relationship to pass on. So it became very a key moment for us to focus on that strategic end state.
Yeah, I look forward to reading that book for sure. And I suppose no matter what side of the fence you sit on with respect to global warming, there's no shortage of natural disasters to refine that playbook for sure. Yeah. David Hammel, over to you. I know you were a command and control officer, UAV pilot back in the day in the Israeli Air Force. Subsequently led a number of R&D related activities. Had a lot of interesting observations given your experience that ultimately led to the company that you founded, the product you founded, balcony.io. And actually, when we think of critical event management, we're more often than not US centric, Europe centric. Love to get your thoughts on and experience and ultimately how that created your idea around Balcony.
Thanks, Mark. So I think there's two key events that were that led to where Balcony is today. One based on my personal experience in the UAV world, and then the other one actually here in the US. The first one was one specific event where there was one of my squadron's UAVs was actually supporting an ambush situation where we basically identified an ambush on the ground and saw an infantry force basically walking into that ambush. And because we were Air Force, they were infantry, we were on one type of radio, they were on the others. We weren't sure which division, which squad they were in. We basically acted as National Geographic there. We were sort of documenting the situation that couldn't help. We saw exactly where everyone was and what the whole situation developing, but except for filming that, and that's actually on YouTube today, we couldn't really help. And that was extremely frustrating for me because we were there and we could have changed the outcome of the event. And that sort of trying to think about how could we have done things differently, that brought us to develop the core technology of Balcony, which is when looking at the imagery, the only thing I knew about those soldiers walking into that ambush was their location. I knew they were our forces, couldn't know where they were on the organigram of the whole force, but I knew their location. And so I thought to myself, if I could communicate based on location rather than based on specific personal details or organizational details, I could have basically communicated with them. And so that brought us to build the core backend engine in Balcony, which allows to geo-communicate, basically point at the map and communicate with the people at the specific location at a given time. So that was one event that basically was a trigger to think differently on how communications can be done. And by the way, today with phones, it's pretty simple. The phones can share location, and so taking location into account can very much change the way critical information flows within a critical event. The second key event was here in the US, Hurricane Harvey that hit Houston around 2017, if I'm not mistaken. And there you see an advanced city, you'd say, pretty much a rich city in the US. And when there's an emergency happening, basically 911 collapses and you see people standing on the roof tweeting, asking for help, right? And looking at this, I thought to myself, there must be, again, another way to do this. And when analyzing how things are done, you realize that current sort of emergency response situations are mostly focused on the mass notification, although an event is never solved when at the notification. It often only starts at the notification, and then you blast a message to the whole city, and then you route them to that crazy bottleneck, which is 911, which is one-on-one call taking, right? And so and basically this functionality didn't really change since World War II. In London, there were the same thing, nice sirens about attacks, and then call 911 or whatever the number was. That approach didn't change. At the same time, when you look at how an enterprise works on a daily basis, it's all about asynchronous chat. You have Slack, you have Teams, you have all those tools, multiple, you run multiple conversations at the same time. My teenage daughter, she orchestrates her life on asynchronous chat, right? And so that was another aha moment, taking Bruce's words, where combining those two sort of the technology of video messaging and the understanding that there must be a better way to orchestrate mass situations That's sort of routed the way for where Balkan is today.
Yeah, and we'll get into what you're doing today here in a minute. So on that note, why don't we pivot? Let's talk about where we are today. Get to know a little bit more of your role, your companies, how you're addressing critical event management. Ty, let's start with you, and then we'll get into a group discussion around where we are and where we need to go. Love to hear about Allied Universal. Naturally, Allied has long been, a key player in protective services in particular. A number of acquisitions, most notably G4S, suddenly Allied Universal's the largest security company in the world. And if I have it right, the third largest employer in the United States.
Right.
So would love to hear, the current sort of high level view of Allied Universal. And then naturally, what's next? Yeah, presumably Allied's been, largely involved in traditionally in gates, guns, guards, but as evident in, a lot of the practice areas that frankly you're managing, risk advisory being one of those. Love to hear, what's next on the plate for Allied and specifically services related to critical event management.
Well, thanks, Mark. I think obviously, as you just mentioned, the G4S acquisition changed our profile dramatically. We became a global company, a little over 20 billion in revenue, operating in 90 countries. So our risk as a company and the risk that we deal with and manage and support our clients from a mitigation standpoint has changed dramatically with that acquisition. But we've made other acquisitions prior to that have started building out the framework for a multi-service integrated solutions provider. Our technology platform from an integrated security system standpoint has really started getting foundation. Carrie Badel is my colleague that manages that business. And so we're strategically defining and working diligently on how do we bring technology into the traditional man guarding environment and building that ecosystem, because as you said, we are the third largest employer in the United States. So we do have a significant amount of resources on the ground, putting the tools in the hands of those resources and using that information and that intelligence to benefit us and our clients is extremely critical. Our CIO, Marc has led an initiative that built a product that's an AI powered workforce management system. Helios is the name of that product. It's really the core of our ecosystem, from the sharing of information with the labor element of our business and ensuring that we're looking at critical events. We're looking at incident activity and the correlation of how we deploy our resources, how we put intelligence and information in the hands of our resources. And then how does that connect, if you will, to the larger technology businesses that I mentioned that are under Carrie that are coming into play also. And then from my perspective, I'm managing the risk management, risk mitigation businesses that are advising on risk and quite frankly, helping design the solution for our customers that are bringing in all those different elements. And it's been a very exciting process. We are building that platform and continuing to look at the different solutions that entails, both on a domestic and international scale. But as mentioned earlier, the key is really the solution designing and the integrating of all those capabilities, which is really what we're focusing on, is how to do that seamlessly so that it's transparent to the customer, but they're getting the information that they need to make business decisions and support the critical thinking that really defines how they bring value to their own organizations and their own businesses.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned solution design and integration. I often see that's an important part of integrators supporting large organizations. Do you see Allied Universal using its own internal resources in that systems engineering design, or relying heavily on application engineers and other integrators to help you? Or is there going to be an inflection point where you're going to toggle from one to the other, do you think?
I think it's a combination of both.
Yeah.
I think we'll continue to build that muscle, if you will, inside Allied Universal. I mean, we are transforming who we are and what we do and how we do it. So that those skills and that expertise is critical internally. But obviously there's value and benefit on utilizing external resources to augment that also. But I do think it will be an evolutionary process, and you'll continue to see the skills become more part of the day-to-day operations of all of our functions. And quite frankly, the tools that allow us to assess, design, and build solutions are evolving also. And those will be absolutely important as we bring solutions to the market that have been different from what we've done historically.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Mike, love to hear about Concentric. I know Concentric's been around for a little over a decade. Initially bootstrapped by the founder, Roderick Jones. You mentioned earlier, you're collaborating on a book together. As a sizable service provider, you recently rebranded. You joined as CEO after retiring in the Navy and also serving at the NCTC for a while. Love to hear about Concentric. Share, with the viewers, size, scope, footprint, what you all are up to today.
Great. Hey, thanks, Mark. Yeah, the impressive tie from that perspective. Concentric, mid-size, privately owned premium security company that we look at serving ultra high net worth, and family offices, as well as providing embedded services. And our approach is we look, much like Ty had mentioned, a holistic premium security service, assessing, providing support across the full spectrum, whether it's physical, whether it's cyber, and now privacy is a big portion of that, and includes those embedded services where we'll provide unique intelligence support or security support to be able to provide that to our clients. We have a unique background of skill sets like mine. Roderick Jones was a special branch, and we have others that eclectic background with a nuance for global security and approach that has helped us really attract folks from the intelligence community, law enforcement, special operations, and so forth. And as you know, these folks with that background and training and experiences, they tend to produce people that are used to dealing and accustomed to dealing with ambiguity, that uncertainty and chaos. So perfect in critical events and that critical thinking that Ty talked about as well.
Oh, that's great. Can you share at all some of the, when we think of critical event management technologies supporting, some of the technologies maybe you've developed internally or, leverage, third-party resources right now?
Yeah, that's, Mark, great question, because that's such an important part from the security perspective and from the clients we serve. So we look at really utilizing some of the, already provided out there, the cloud-based SaaS type products, the software services, the tools, and we try to, our architecture is designed to be able to achieve that maximum part of security, resiliency, and scalability as the company continues to grow. And it facilitates that remote work, the distributed teams, the high availability and redundancy and continuity needed now with the dispersed. We're now operating in 34 states and we have people stationed in 2 countries, but like Ty, we operate in about 140 different countries supporting domestic and international travel abroad. And we think it's these modular solutions, these core capabilities, such as the synchronous and asynchronous comms and data exchange that really extend and augment what we're trying to achieve with the specialty tools that we need to be able to do that. And we've also done some internal as well as support for ransomware attack and extortion training for some of our clients as well, because in today's business, it's not a matter of if, it's when it occurs, and how do you minimize that attack, and how do you make sure that you're able to respond and bring your systems back online and have the resiliency to do that in the quickest manner.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how large is Concentric people-wise?
Yeah, people-wise, 276 people, full-time and part-time employees. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Bruce, back to you. You, not so recently anymore, sold WorldAware to Garda. Now it's part of Crisis 24, but you've got decades of experience running the world's largest private intelligence company. And now in McIndoe Risk Advisory, you're continuing to help enterprises, critical event management products and services companies. Tell us more about what you're doing these days, some of the challenges you're up against.
Maybe trying to clean up the mess.
Still messy, yeah?
I would say it's feverishly worse than it's ever been. Where do you start? It's like you have all of these disciplines, right? Whether it's business continuity and the EHS people, emergency management, security, and everyone is like clawing and trying to vie for the top spot, whether it's business continuity wanting to be business resiliency, or security now is enterprise security risk management, and it's a fever pitch, and they're all protecting this kind of like massive investment that they've made in language and in certifications, and they don't want to budge, and so that's the nature of like where we are from a kind of market perspective, and each of them, again, from a platform perspective, have business continuity, stovepipe things, you got security, and you've got all these things that are out there, and companies' heads are spinning. And so that's the nature of where we are right now. When I'm working with companies, and my message is super simple. And I focus on what I'm calling operational resiliency. I don't want to get into organizational resiliency. That makes my head hurt. But I can understand operational resiliency, right? And when I talk to senior managers and I say, you have already been executing operational resiliency from the time that you had the existential threat to your business, which was COVID-19. And they kind of look at me and like, well, what does that mean? What did you do? You flattened the organization, you pulled the experts together into a team, whether it was a crisis, COVID-19 task force or whatever you called it. And you said, here's my problem. We need to keep this business running and survive. And you let them figure out solutions, make quick decisions, deploy them. If they worked, reinforce them and scaled them. If they didn't, come back to the drawing board and do it again. And that's how you ran your business and survived. Why would you ever give that up? Why would you ever give it up? Let's institutionalize that model so that you can operate that way in a world of cascading events, right? That we're seeing right now as it plays out. So that's what I've been helping them do. And I love the Air Force, and I've been working with some teams that are supporting kind of their next gen, like how do they go to war and how do they operate in the metaverse, right? They have, virtual reality and all this stuff. But the one thing that I love, it's called Agile Combat Employment. And we need ACE in our space. And that is, what does that mean? I don't train one airman to be a bomb loader. And when I'm not loading bombs, they're sitting on their butt. I want to get them in different classifications so that they're fungible and I can move them around and use them in a much higher degree and broaden their expertise and understanding, not of a silo, but what those adjacent areas are doing and be competent, right? And that's what we need in this. We need people that are knowledgeable in emergency management, crisis management, business continuity, security, physical and cyber. We should have that multidisciplinary skill set as the goal, not putting somebody in a silo and saying you're a business continuity guy forever, right? Because we're not going to win that way, and there's just not enough resources to win that way. And so
it works so great for the government, right?
What's that?
It works so great in government, though, right?
I see it happening, and I've been working with a number of, these are Fortune 100 companies that really are getting it. but it'll trickle down. And it's like, critical event management, Ty said continuous event management. I've always looked at this, and this term was coined, essentially by Everbridge. It's like, that's like the end state, right? It's like, how did we get there that we're now dealing with a critical event? And continuous event management, yeah, because everything's getting thrown at us, but I'm saying, no, it's continuous risk management. I want to get to the front end of this with indicators and forecasts and understanding how I should be ready for whatever is going to get thrown at me, right? And then work through mitigating and supporting that, or responding and recovering to whatever event. And I love this term. I don't own it, but I was at a conference and a guy said, critical event management, critical is in the eyes of the beholder. And if you have a young daughter or child, you know what that means, right? So what does that mean? Critical is relevant, right? Relative to the individual. So those are the broad things that I'm trying to do, is try to bring this together. And it rolls back to the 80s and 90s when I was actually implementing and deploying SAP R3. And there's nothing that brought a company together in a more comprehensive way than a common system with common data and common language. And that's what we need.
Love it. David, you introduced us a little bit to Balcony, at least how you got there. Love to hear a little bit more about the features, functionality, that gap you're filling in the industry with respect to critical event management. Introduce us to what you've been doing, the problems you're solving.
Sounds good. So Balcony basically is a enterprise SaaS geo-orchestration solution. My dog is not happy with my definition of what we're doing. And as we were saying before, the idea is to facilitate the real-time bidirectional flow of mission-critical information between the people in charge on one hand and the affected people on the ground. And the notion is that with an integrated solution that integrates both real-time intelligence, GIS, messaging, force tracking, and analytics into very simple and intuitive solution, we basically allow to ensure that a decision maker understands the situation and can immediately take action upon it. So the notion is, it's not only about alerting or mass notifying, it's about orchestrating the whole situation as it develops. For example, Balcony was used to support the pullout of Kabul, Afghanistan last August. One person out of Ann Arbor, Michigan it was operated by Direct Relief, and the person in charge was actually their VP, Andrew Schroeder, was sitting on the dashboard and basically orchestrating hundreds of people, including a group of 150 female students out of Bangladesh who had to be evacuated because they were under serious risk, orchestrating them in Kabul during multiple days just to try and get them away from the suicide bombers, try to find a way into the base, etc. And the whole idea was that it was impossible to manage this on WhatsApp or an email or on Slack, right? Just asking 250 people, where are you right now? What's your situation? And getting 150 answers back with the location where they need help, impossible to manage on any other tool. And this is where sort of Balcony was sort of came into the value of the geo orchestration capability came into play, is where you could actually see where people are. You can see every message where it comes from. So if somebody says, I need help, I'm stuck with the bus, you can immediately put it into context. You can immediately geo forward, pass this message on, escalate it if needed, break silos. So the system allows to immediately push that message from one person to, for example, the security people or the people that in charge in that area, etc. And the user experience on the other side, the Balcony mobile app, it's exactly like WhatsApp. So the whole notion is that, I mean, those girls in Afghanistan were never trained by us. They received zero training. They just received a link or QR code. They clicked on it and they were on what we call the situational network. And the whole notion was everybody today knows how to chat. Everybody today knows how to manage asynchronous messaging. And so taking that sort of acceptance or market acceptance and putting it into emergency response, linking that into location, mapping, etc., that was actually proven as an example there in Afghanistan. Now it's operational in Ukraine as well with a few accounts. But the whole notion is building a solution that is actually extremely trivial to use on one hand, a lot of work in the back end to make it trivial, as we know, but really facilitating the instantaneous deployment, right? There was no one in Afghanistan with our app when the Taliban took over Kabul. Instantaneously the deployment, same thing with Ukraine, right? Less than 24 hours after go, the network was already fully operational for a Fortune 500 company. So this is the kind of things that we've built to provide. And the whole notion, again, is not about the alerting, it's about the orchestration. Just telling everybody in Kiev, the Russians just started an attack as a mass notification had zero value. They all knew about it. Since then, thousands and thousands, if not tens of thousands of messages just to orchestrate and manage and make sure people are safe. So that is sort of the high level. And one last thing is that we build a solution knowing that orchestration can be challenging, especially when you have one person managing hundreds of people. So the solution is not only about messaging, there's embedded AR, embedded AI, embedded analytics, basically empowering the decision maker to handle very large flow of information in real time, to control the engagement as if they were there, right? So we have live streaming, AR over live streaming, overlays on the map that you can, like a coach, you can just throw design on the map where you want people to go and they'll get it as part of the chat, etc., etc. Again, the goal is to facilitate it. As one of our customers said, the closest you'll ever get to teleportation. I'm the incident manager. I need to be there in Kiev in order to control and tell people where to go. That was the goal. And I think we succeeded to get very close to that. Yeah,
no, that's great. That's some impactful work. Let's open it up to group discussion now. You know, we mentioned COVID, we mentioned Ukraine. I mean, frankly, the last 3 years in particular have been some very, you know, global seismic events. You know, how have these events, what opportunities, what challenges have you all encountered with respect to, you know, managing these events? You know, we're suddenly in a distributed workforce environment, and the definition of the workplace is, you know, went from pretty clear definition in a lot of critical event management tools built around, you know, geolocating assets, and now suddenly the workplace is everywhere, anytime. You know, curious, some of these major events, how has that changed your how has that brought new opportunities for your businesses, and what are some of the observations or even gaps that we're seeing that it probably shook from the trees? Who wants to go first?
I looks anxious.
Go
ahead, Mike. You.
Go, Bruce.
Okay, so the one big thing that I'm seeing over the last couple of years working with clients is getting their head around a widely, like globally now, dispersed workforce. That, you know, pretty much it used to be, you know, EHS kind of handled the facility. People were at home. We took care of them when they traveled or when we put on assignment, and everything was good, right? And now it's like that doesn't work anymore. And, you know, I've got people that are operating remotely. I've got major compliance issues around immigration, tax law, and things. So I have to have location awareness, which kind of feeds into Dave's whole premise. You know, it's like I have clients that, for example, major pharmaceutical has now log in for your day, where when you log in, you have to declare, where are you? Right? So they basically have, days in country, and so they can kind of monitor that for all their compliance reasons, but also when there's something, if there's a severe weather or, social unrest or whatever is going on, you now have awareness. Well, do we have anything in Omaha? I don't think so. Well, they look, oh, well, we got 3 people that are there right now. Well, what are they doing there? Well, they're with their mother-in-law, or they're visiting, or they're buying steaks. I don't know, whatever, right? And I love this talking to management, because, we talk about work from anywhere, right? And that's like the big thing, work from remotely and work from anywhere. When I talk to managers, what they're saying is hire from anywhere. That's what matters to them, that they can go find the best resources regardless of where they live and bring them to the business objective, right? So I think that's, and this whole concept of that distributed workforce and now, bringing together these disciplines to work as a holistic, multidisciplinary team is got to be the end state. But I don't know, Ty, what you think.
Well, I thought, that's an interesting perspective, Bruce, and I agree with you 100%. One thing that I have personally noticed that I thought has been, number one, it's been very important to the discipline, if you will, is the evolution of technology. And just like my colleagues here on the phone now have stated, there's a tremendous amount of technology that's in the market now. One of the challenges is that the integration of the technology, one, is hard to establish at the level you need it to operate as efficiently and effectively as you can. And that has been frustrating as I've tried to partner with different solutions to bring them into our processing and our service support. And I still think there's a tremendous amount of work that's needed to be able to find the right integration points so you don't overwhelm the process, but you provide selective information and intelligence as needed based on the event, based on the need, et cetera, et cetera. But the one thing that I would add to that I think is, number one, it takes a very skilled set of managers and/or outside consultants, I think, to be able to help an organization. And that's to define where you at in your maturity as an organization. A maturity model to just lay over your organization on how you work together, how you analyze, and how you critically think, and how efficient and how effective are you in managing all of this. To be able to look at that with objectivity and to assess how effective you are and how mature you are as an organization, I think is absolutely critical, because we can provide all the tools and you can provide all the solutions and you can really bring a good solution set to a user. But if they do not interact and work in a very integrated and aligned way, the efficiency and the effectiveness of the output is severely hindered. And that's one thing that I think we've seen as events have grown in complexity, as they've grown in volume, and they've been dispersed on a global basis, is some organizations have not learned how to work well together with the tools that they now have at their disposal. That's one thing that I would just add to Bruce's comments, which I thought were right on point.
And Todd, I would just add one thing, because when I talk to clients, I talk absolutely about maturity, but I know Mike can weigh in on this. It's maturity and capacity.
Yes.
And that's where companies, they may have some like teams that work really well together, but they have no scalability to deal with major issues. But Mike, you might have a point on that.
Yeah. Well, Bruce and Ty, I'd double tap everything you said. It is really interesting, kind of from the strategic level, how you look at things, from the resiliency, how do you red team now? How do you look at those second and third order effects? The beauty of the dispersed workforce gives you much more clarity. We initially had just San Francisco and Seattle as kind of home bases. COVID hit, and it opened it up. And I would say that we probably 10x'd in every position that opportunity now to hire kind of across the country or worldwide to be able to support that. But Ty, what you were saying, you know, so critical about the rapid digitalization that COVID brought and what you had to do with it. And so the principles of getting a company to be able to have what I would call an operating rhythm, you know, a predictable cadence that the whole team knows when they're expected to be a part of, how they interplay, and then the tools that you have for the collaborativeness, because as you grow and scale and across go more dispersed, it's really important how you share that information. But then also as leaders, how do you give that almost that commander's intent, that what are those goals you want to achieve to empower your people? But in order for them to be effectively empowered, you got to be able to share all that information and knowledge as well as guidance that you provide. And so, yeah, I couldn't agree more. David, probably in some of the AI tools, when you were talking about drones and stuff, I was getting like, ooh, you know, interesting. But the AI adds another aspect to it as well as the connectivity.
And it's interesting when we talk about information and commander's intent and those kinds of things, we are as a broad industry, we are losing like respect with senior executives. And the reason we're losing respect is we have stovepipe systems with stovepipe data. And when they ask a question, they get 2 or 3 different answers. They don't like that. It's like, why are we spending, you know, 7 figures on this stuff? And you can't tell me how many people I have somewhere or what business processes impacted in that facility. Or it's like, what the hell is going on? And it's true. You know, it's like everybody's rushing to this space to you know, have digital transformation and bring technology in, but they're doing it in their domain, business continuity and emergency management and security and cyber. That's got to get fixed because we are losing the game, and it's not helping anybody. We've got to get universal language. We've got to get federated data so that these systems are all, you know, looking at the same information. So.
Big question for you. You know, as we talk about distributed workforces and the opportunity to hire, you know, great talent anywhere, even from a customer perspective, that presents, you know, that's always presented privacy challenges. Have you seen a shift in appetite with respect to, you know, a duty of care meets, you know, you work in any time, any place, but also are you seeing less friction with respect to privacy because now people recognize in this, you know, years of turmoil, the benefit of having, you know, a balcony to be able to reach out and touch me when I need it, because I might wake up this morning and need it and not even know it. And now that I'm not working in the office, I need your, you know, your ability, whether you're a service provider, tech provider, or, you know, a CSO at a Fortune 500. I'm just curious how you're seeing those challenges.
I'll throw one thing out, and that is if this industry continues to use the word tracking, the war is over, because no employees want to be tracked. And when we still throw, you know, travel tracking and GPS tracking and vehicle tracking and tracking, they don't want that, especially in Europe, right? And they also don't want to have to disclose what they're doing when they're not working, right? France is a good example. So we have to respect that. And that's why, you know, we use the term location awareness when you're working. And if you want to disclose where you are when you're not working because you want to partake in the safety net, sure. But if I know basically the city that you're at, we're in the game. I don't need to know your lat long until there's an evac or some other, I have to, you know, dispatch assets to you, right? So anyway, that would be one that I would say, if we can erase the word tracking from our industry, that would be great.
Actually, I think that duty of care is an interesting one, you know, and now as leaders and managers, I think you have to look at it holistically. You know, the stresses that people went through COVID, and, you know, many of us that have gone through crises see that impact on the individuals. and no telling. But that privacy one, because you're operating across the US or even global, how do you maintain that continuity and connectivity, but also keep everybody informed is one of the key things. And on the privacy side, what we found out recently, is that there is so much information out there online and digitally available for folks. I know for some of our clients, privacy has become a big thing for them. And so we offer a service to take some of that information off from the aggregate sites to try to obfuscate, because you can find out so much that sometimes, depending on, and unfortunately in a politicized environment that we're in, sensitive information about businesses, about families, about locations, and other things that can be used nefariously for some folks that oppose their point of view, whatever they decide, whether it's economic, political, or social issue. So privacy has really become a big one, and then for the workforce, like David said, it's, it is interesting, and it's kind of like, and that you have to train managers that you were used to, hey, you checked in at 8, you checked out at 5. That's no longer, it's kind of that awareness that says, oh, wait a second, I got folks overseas, maybe I better hold this meeting at a decent hour that's not in the middle of their supper time or bedtime, or, fill in the blanks, or when they're watching their kids play sports or whatever. So it has added a new dynamic, but much more flexibility and agility. And what Brian said earlier, breaking down the stovepipes, breaking down the silos. We used to call them the cylinders of excellence. You gotta destroy those to make it a much more agile and adaptable organization.
And I think there's an additional point. I totally agree. There's an additional point, maybe, that the fact that privacy is always a function of the value received from the service. Right. So, for example, we don't think twice when we share location with Waze or with a navigation tool, just because it gives us immediate value. Right. And we know that maybe Google is doing whatever they do with that information. But as long as there's a value proposition that is immediately connected to this, then people feel pretty comfortable to do so. One of the things that we've built Balcony around exactly for this, in addition to the fact that we built the platform privacy by design, GDPR friendly, it can be totally anonymized, and can also be deployed and used ad hoc when there's a need. Again, because we don't focus on the alerting part, but on the orchestration part. You don't have to share your location all your life just in case you happen to walk into an active shooter scenario. It's built to really sort of pop out and be used when there's a need. But more than this, we build it to be able to support not only the emergency, so day-to-day operations. For example, we've been used in Mexico City, but one of the departments of the city, just to orchestrate daily operations of their over 1,000 employees on the ground. It's chaos by definition there, and so it's built for day-to-day operations, planned events, so situations that are planned but are going to be challenging, and unplanned emergencies. And so the whole notion is that an organization doesn't need 3 different tools to do that. At the end of the day, it's all about managing and orchestrating and communicating with people. But at the same time, from the user perspective, if I have one tool that I'm being engaged on, for example, when I'm waiting for the shuttle in the morning, just receiving messages from shuttle management. And again, shuttle management doesn't know who is waiting for the bus at that specific location, but they know where they're waiting, right? So geo-messaging now, I get a message, I'm not spammed, it's just in time. That's so I immediately have a value proposition that allows me to be on the platform on a daily basis, and of course would be ready in case of emergency. And as we know, also tools that are dedicated for emergency often are not used, because when there's an emergency, when there's pressure, when there's a big unknown, often people tend to go to what they feel most comfortable. We've heard people that go back to landlines when there's an emergency, because that's the way to try and get a hold of somebody. So the notion of building a solution that supports the organization across the life cycle, and when there's an emergency, immediately you escalate into that emergency with the tools that everybody feels comfortable with. That was part of our goal, in addition to taking privacy and anonymity as a major element within the buildup of that solution.
Yeah, no, that resonates. In the last couple minutes, perhaps, one final question for you. As we talk about people, process, technology, and governance in this, tech-enabled world, multi-sensor driven world, there's a lot of not new information, but information, access to information, threat indicators, for instance, that as security practitioners, we never really consumed or had time or effort to focus on, that are now becoming impactful, available. Food security, very timely concern. Are you seeing, whether it's your customers, organizations leveraging, are you seeing new indicators out there, or the consumption of new indicators out there for purposes of detecting, analyzing, mitigating critical events?
Yeah, go ahead, Ty.
No, Mark, the one thing I want to add to the previous conversation that my colleague stated on too is I think we have an opportunity to reset everything here. I think it's whether it's corporate prioritizations with what's happening from an economy standpoint, whether it's some of the other social, economic, political issues that were stated. I do think we have an opportunity here to step back and reset what everyone has recognized and made note of, which I thought was a very comprehensive perspective. For your last question, Mark, I do believe that there, and I think Bruce and Mike both stated, we still have to be very careful on how much we continue to try to intake, and without the right integration points and the right and clear objective of what the end game and the goal is. But without a doubt, intelligent video, robots and drones, satellite imagery, sensors of all types. I mean, information is there now, and clients are asking for it. But to the comment earlier about how do you manage that information, how do you keep it relevant, and how do you keep it a benefit to the end game and the mission is absolutely critical. And I'm really concerned if we're not careful, we're going to continue to overload the process, overload the system, and not be able to efficiently and effectively deliver the service expected and the timeliness and the effectiveness of what the targeted goal is.
Yeah,
and with that, I'll let my colleagues speak to the other things they're seeing evolving. But I'm going to
build on that, Ty, because there is the amount of data and sensors at our fingertips is like growing literally exponentially every day, right? When I work with clients, and what I've been focusing on is don't focus on the sensors, focus on the assets that you're protecting. And then what sensors, whether it's human, whether it's technology or whatever, can help you manage and protect that asset, right? And I spend a lot of time focusing on people assets. You have people, you have locations, supply, and information. Those are the 4 asset classes, period, right? On the people side, bring it together. People risk management, not just duty of care, risk to the person, but what's the person's risk to the institution, to the organization? And bring that data together through a governance structure, whether it's human behavioral indicators, technology, cyber, whatever it is, so that the people that are managing to protect those assets, no matter where they are, have that common view and get those indicators when there is something going off the rails so that they can get ahead of it. That's how you solve this, and whatever sensors can help you do that, bring them to the game.
Yeah, I'd say the same. I'd double again. It's just great comments. We had a good comment about the absorptive capacity to be able to do that. And I'm taking back to the 4 things: data, information, understanding, and knowledge. We do have so much information out there. How do you bring all that multispectral intelligence together? Is it AI? Is it machine learning that they've talked about? What is it that brings it together? And that smart push. I'll never, the gobs of data to a senior doesn't make sense. You need to be able to be articulate, quick, and it has to be precise to be able to give that knowledge and understanding of the events that are going on, to be able to do that. Where that came from, that's all behind the scenes to be able to articulate that. But I just second all the great points. David, you're probably seeing it a lot more on your AI, on the imagery side and AI.
So Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think actually linking also to the past Mark, your past question, because people now are basically working from everywhere. They're moving outside of sort of the security and intelligence domes or umbrellas that enterprises and organizations had, all those cameras and shot spotters and public address, and suddenly your people are outside of that, right? The cameras are looking inside, but they're not there. And so suddenly the set of information sources, etc., is changing. How do how do I have people now in Paris? How do I take care of them? They're outside of my cameras. At the same time, the amount of information is huge. So as you mentioned, right, we tried at least on our end to redefine a term that we call just-in-time information, right? Supply chain also talks about just-in-time. How do we provide just-in-time information? Because exactly like Waze, I don't want to get all resources of police speed traps in California every morning. I don't care about that. I want to get an alert about a police trap 200 yards before I hit it, right? So I can step on the brake. So I need that information just in time as I'm moving around and as things are dynamic. And so it's a huge challenge. And again, the expectations of the people are, I don't want you to spam me it doesn't matter, if I'm your employee or your citizen or now in an operation. I want to get just the right information at the right moment. And that's a huge challenge. The other point is the fact that, again, because of the blurring of the definition of duty of care, right? I have employees, there's a train in Paris, heading to Paris. I have traveler employees in the train. I want to alert them of social unrest in Paris. My employees that are sitting there are not through our travel system, they will not get the alert. So on the same train, some people will get the alert, some people will not, because the solutions today are sort of very
Stovepipe.
much sorry?
Stovepipe.
Exactly. And so those are also challenges, right? How do you get that information to break those silos, just to make sure the right people get the right information at the right time? So that, definitely one of the bigger challenges, and where things are moving on.
Gentlemen, I appreciate all the comments here. You're all doing great work. Let's call this, I guess, the great reset, right? And collectively get our act together and move forward. Some great sound bites, continuous risk management.
People risk management.
Yeah. No, I love it. A lot of great notes here. So thank you again for the time. Appreciate you joining us, and look forward to the next conversation with you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Take care,
everybody.
guys.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Enjoyed it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Mark. Thank you.
Take care.